Welcome to Pond. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the co-founder, CEO, and Chief Impact Officer. We want to make tech work for good. So we're highlighting and uplifting the critical parts of the impact technology ecosystem through human conversations with the leaders and shapers of the industry. Let's jump in.
Meet Adina Lichtman, someone whose care for others is only matched by her penchant for hustle. She's a force to be reckoned with and is humanizing homelessness, one sock at a time.
Adina, thanks so much for joining us. Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your organization?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll dive in. My name is Adina. I'm originally from West Orange, New Jersey, but living in New York City since college, which definitely brought me to starting Knock Knock Give a Sock. A little bit about Knock Knock Give a Sock and how we got started is a fun story. I was giving out some sandwiches to my neighbors on the street, and one guy said, "Ma'am, it's so nice you're giving out sandwiches, but one thing we could really use are a pair of socks." So I went back to my dorm room. I opened my drawer and I saw I had pink socks, polka dotted socks. They weren't going to fit this new guy, Diego. So I decided to go and knock on every door on my floor. And in about 15 minutes, I got over 40 pairs of socks. Fast forward to my senior year of college, we'd spread to over 20 college campuses and collected over 50,000 pairs of socks. Now, I joke at that point that I kind of became this sock celebrity on campus. I was named social entrepreneur. I didn't even know how to spell the word entrepreneur. I was like this little social work student, no plan on starting my own business. But then my parents were like, "Dude, you can't keep all of these socks in our garage. Like, we have no more room." And I started to want to get sock companies to match our donations. So all of a sudden we had to become a 501c3, a tax deductible nonprofit organization. And more socks were coming, and I had to raise money to get a warehouse. So I kind of say in the beginning, we were an accidental nonprofit. We came to be totally by accident. And then what was interesting was during this time, I kind of became the expert on college campuses around homelessness. So people would ask me to come speak in their different in their different college classes, synagogues, churches. And I would always ask the audience two questions. So I'm going to ask it for you first.
Okay.
You're going to have to answer the question, but you might be the exception, not the rule, but we'll see. And also anyone listening, think about these questions. Have you ever given money, food, or clothing to someone in need or to a shelter?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so my second question is, do you know the name of one person who's homeless?
No.
No. And this is the common response. We have so many people who are good and giving and caring, but they actually are so disconnected from the community in which they're helping. So what was also interesting was I was on a very progressive and liberal college campus, right? I was at NYU, where everyone's so careful about the way they speak. Everyone's so careful about stereotyping. Yet somehow when it came to homelessness, stereotyping was the norm. They would say, "Adina, what you're doing is great, but come on, aren't most of them choosing to be homeless?" Or, "Come on, Adina, like most of them have mental illness." On college campus, we don't say mental illness anymore. We talk about mental health, mental wellness, right? Aren't they all drug addicts or alcoholics? These are questions I would get on the daily. And I realized there was this disconnect. So now, before I move on to what happened next, I have another two questions for you. What percentage, out of everyone who's homeless, what percentage of people who are homeless live on the streets in New York City? Take a guess.
75%.
So, and people think that. Street homelessness is actually only 5% of homelessness in New York City.
Oh.
95% are living in shelters and living in cars. But the image that we have is that guy holding a cardboard sign, is that guy with the long beard, long hair, might smell, you have a shopping cart. Okay, so now my next question for you. Out of the number 60,000, we have around 60,000 people who are homeless on any given night in New York City. What number do you think are children?
Oof, way too high. Half, 30,000.
So very close. Yeah, we have just around 25,000. Right. And when we think about homelessness, though, we don't imagine little kids, we don't imagine families, right? We imagine that guy in the street corner. So my senior year of college, I decided to bring 50 of my college classmates and 50 people living in local shelters to have dinner side by side. But college students, and sorry, we had two rules at this dinner. One, you weren't allowed to sit next to someone you knew before coming into that room. And two, no one was allowed to serve one another. It was all family style meals. So at that dinner, we had college students coming over to me saying, Adina, I can't tell who's homeless and who's not. They're meeting moms who had 3 kids who couldn't afford childcare, dads who'd gotten out of prison but couldn't get jobs afterwards, people working minimum wage jobs, but that doesn't get you out of the shelter system. So all of a sudden, homelessness had a name and a face and a story to it. And that was really impactful. And that's when Knock Knock Give a Sock became a college, went from being like this sock project to something that I wanted to create my profession around. So the difference was I didn't want to do it with college campuses. That was great, but I wanted to bring it to the corporate space. I wanted the JP Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, the Salesforces of the world to have these meet your neighbor dinners. So who the heck's going to listen to me? I'm this like little tiny college kid graduating, being like, oh, JP Morgan, let's do a dinner with your employees and people living in shelters. Oh, and let's do it in your office. It'd be the most radical thing in the world. And that's when our mission became humanizing homelessness one sock at a time by turning transactions into interactions. So essentially, we approach these big companies like JP Morgan and we get them to do a sock drive. And then after they do a sock drive, we then offer them the opportunity to meet the recipients of these sock donations by bringing their employees and people living in local shelters to dine side by side in their offices. But we're able to do that a lot more easily when we build that relationship around the sock collections. So really quickly, and then I'll shut my mouth and open it to questions, but essentially pre-COVID, our organization had 3 different buckets. We had socks where we would distribute 500,000 pairs of socks a year to our neighbors living in shelters, and we would actually hire people living in shelters to do the pickups and drop-offs from the different offices. The second thing is we would do these meet your neighbor lunches and dinners with corporate companies. And the third thing is we would do 2 big community events a year. One which we called our Woodstock Music Festival, where we brought artists living in homes and artists living in shelters to share the stage and perform side by side. And the other one was our annual Happy Holiday Carnival, where we had a children's carnival for over 300 kids living in shelters right around Christmas time. And we say that that's actually the only event a year in which we bring in volunteers, because for us, we flip that volunteer model on its head. It's all about building relationships. So really, the Holiday Carnival for Kids is the only event in which people can volunteer. And we even have people from shelters volunteering at that carnival.
Wow, that is so amazing. I know you just sped through what I think is like it's 8 years. How long have you been working on this?
So I would say I started it like that first night giving out sandwiches. I would say that was probably around 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. But since then, I've been doing it full time since I graduated college. I've been doing it full time for 4 years, and I've been on payroll for 3 years.
Wow. So when you had that initial interaction with someone, when you were trying to do something good and hand out sandwiches, and the person says like, I don't really need this sandwich, I'd rather have socks. Did you have a moment where you were kind of like, well, screw you, dude, I'm trying to help? Like, or did you immediately just say like, no, you're totally right and change? Because that is hard for a lot of people.
It's interesting. Sometimes your parents teach you lessons and it only like clicks years later. My dad used to always tell this story. He was an educator and worked with children who had special needs his whole life. But he basically used to always tell this story, which the moral was, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but instead of saying, let me help you, here's this, here's that, to actually ask, how can I help you? Is there anything I can do? And I had that moment, it was kind of this lesson that I knew that came to life in that moment. So it wasn't that moment of feeling like, how do you not want this? But it was more like, oh, yeah, my dad was right. Like it is about asking people what they want or what they need and not just making that assumption. So for me, it was just kind of like, all right, let's figure this out. I think I also had a lot of friends in school that I was connected with who were entrepreneurs who were constantly always thinking like, what's the solution? What's the next thing we can build? And I didn't grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. Like I said, didn't even know how to spell the word entrepreneur. So I
I
really
still
didn't
don't really know how to spell it, to be clear. I rely
so
on spell
difficult,
check.
so difficult. And so I think it was being surrounded with people who are constantly thinkers and doers, like that sprung me into action, that got me excited about doing a project. And also that moment of, wait, we really do need to think about asking what people need as opposed to making those assumptions. And it was kind of that like fable or, kind of that lofty idea which came to life in that
Yeah.
moment.
And so I guess I'll push you a little bit on that lesson that you learned, because I think that's relatively common amongst folks trying to have an impact, is they want to hear and they want to learn and they want to change to have an impact. But it's almost harder to do that for yourself, because you started this from scratch. You used your parents' garage, you built the, you put in the time and put this whole thing on your back as a founder. Did you have a moment where you realized like, wow, I can't do anything on my own, I have to ask for help too?
So it's interesting. People ask me like, how did you get started? Like, who helped you? And I'm like, Google and Facebook, like anything that I didn't know how to do. I got an email back from a company asking if I was a 501c3. My dad ran a nonprofit organization for 25 years of my life. I had no idea what a 501c3 was and had to type it into Google. And then only then was my family like, yeah, do you know that? Like, come on, don't you know that? Like, no, I didn't know that. And then, it was my sister's law firm that helped us become a 501c3. And it was constantly asking for help and pushing. And I think I was always a little bit of a self-starter. What's interesting though, and this is, I'll lean into, gender issues I think come about. In high school, I was always starting different things. I created a senior prom for senior citizens when I was in high school with the senior home in our neighborhood. I created a 3-on-3 basketball tournament to raise money for different organizations. I was constantly doing things. And so my family's reaction was, oh, sweet, nice Jewish girl, she should be a social worker, right? Whereas if I was a man who was doing all those things, creating all those programming, right, it would be like, oh, he should go into business. He's a real eye for business. And so I think I was always, asking for help. And I think I got very used to asking for help at a young age, and networking and connecting with people. But I think I never thought of that as a business trait. And I always thought of that as a social work trait as I was growing up.
Yeah, and I would argue, you've had to be so resourceful. It seems like that's probably been one of the biggest keys to your success, right? Is not being afraid to ask for it. I mean, even the name Knock Knock Give a Sock is probably like scary for someone to think about, knocking on doors and asking for something. Like how do you get over that moment of fear? The person, what are they going to say? Are they going to yell at me? Are they going to slam the door in my face?
Yeah, I think ego is one of the biggest problems when it comes to starting a business. No one wants to be annoying. No one wants to be pesky. No one wants to, reach out too many times, right? It's all about me, 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 me. And there were many different times in my career that I actually had to push against that. I know I was telling a little bit about this story beforehand, but I met someone who worked pretty high up in a big corporate company at a Forbes event. And she was one of the panelist speakers. And I was speaking to her at the end of the event and I was telling her about my work. She's like, oh, I love that. My company can definitely help you. And I was like, yeah, like anything would be great. I even made a joke. I was like, even like $1,000 or $2,000. She's like, girl, I'm going to give you $15,000. Just don't forget to email me. I'm not going to forget to email you. So I emailed her once, didn't get a response, emailed her again 2 weeks later, didn't get a response. And like I was playing with different formats each time, emailed her a third time, just following up, no response. And then I started getting funny. I decided, you know what, screw it. Either she's not reading it at all or she's reading it. So what I decided was every Monday I was going to send her an email with a different subject line. So one subject line was, how about coffee? Next subject line the next week later, not everyone likes coffee. How about tea? And then, I just kept doing like funny subject lines. And I remember one time I emailed her back being like, this is the 7th email I'm sending you, so you probably won't answer it. I made that the subject line. She sent me an email back like 2 weeks later, or not even, I think like 2 days later. I don't even remember what it was, but like she sent me an email back saying, yeah, let's schedule a time to meet, like not acknowledging anything else, just being like, yeah, would love to meet, would love to connect, let's do it. And then I like email back, like try to set up a time. Of course, another like 2-3 emails go unanswered. And then I sent her cupcakes to her office and then called to see if she got the cupcakes. Her secretary was like, yeah, she got the cupcakes, and hung up pretty quickly. I couldn't even like follow up after that. And then I sent her another email like, how'd you enjoy hope you like the cupcakes? And long story short, I eventually got the meeting, in which she didn't even show up to the meeting, and she sent someone else to come meet me, the guy who worked under her. And it was a great meeting. And eventually he stopped answering my emails as well. Right. And the truth is, not one of those, emails mentioned the money. Right. I think maybe the first one said like, hey, you mentioned you were interested in donating. But the rest were just about getting their company involved, because quite frankly, I was much more interested in getting their company involved in a program. And long story short, it was like a lot of back and forths, and I got some other good contacts, and we ended up making something work. But I couldn't let my ego get in the way, right? And there's like a fine balance between humor, right, and not being like, not getting angry, right? Like not getting angry, not getting frustrated is so important. And also finding that balance, right? Not emailing her every day, not emailing her more than once a week, right? But kind of that finding that balance and putting your ego aside. Like I was just like, listen, worst case scenario, these emails are going to outer space. Maybe she'll block me even, but who knows? I could get a good contact out of this. And I would say one more quick story in terms of putting your ego aside. I would do these young professional fundraisers every year that had open bar. We would have like 200 people come. We would do it like once or twice a year. We would have anywhere between 200 to 400 people come. So they were pretty big. I would say leveraging my Jewish network was great. It was predominantly Jewish people who would come. And so I was trying to get more people to come and more people who are out of my network. So I would go on JSwipe and swipe right on every single person and tell them, hey, so excited to see that we match. I'm going to this party. Would you want to meet me there? I got blocked from JSwipe. I actually got kicked off JSwipe, and I was single at that time. So my point is, I put my dating life on the line. I put my ego on the line, and that's what you have to do. And I still have to remind myself of those lessons, like sometimes I'll have like a really great meeting with someone like pretty senior, and all of a sudden, like they won't answer my follow-up email, and I'll be embarrassed. But then I have to remind myself, like, as a nonprofit, we are every company's extracurricular. We're not a business opportunity for them. We're their extracurricular. And I have to take my ego out of the way and just remember, I'm giving them an opportunity to give back. And when they have time, just appreciate any time that you're given, and kind of go into that mentality.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it seems like you're just pretty naturally irreverent, which I think is just really helpful about yourself or anything. Right. And you kind of, that approach to dealing with big companies, as someone who worked at a big one for 7 years at Goldman Sachs, like I totally get it. There's a lot of sort of arbitrary structure and barriers and processes and bureaucracy, no matter how good the company is. Could you just maybe talk a little bit about, because there's something we connected over where I was just literally started laughing out loud when I saw your subtitle on your LinkedIn said, your startup founder, knock, knock, give a sock, not 30 under 30 at Forbes. Like,
Yeah.
I was in stitches reading that. Why was that important for you to say? And I don't mean that in like a critical way. I
No,
just
for
love to hear about
sure. As a self-starter and as a founder, you're constantly looking for validation outside, right? We're constantly looking for someone else to say that we're great beyond friends and family. And to me, I remember I made it into the 36 under 36 in the Jewish week. My mom was kvelling. She was so excited. She was like, this is a great dating opportunity for you. And I'm like, Matt, I couldn't give a shit about Jewish Week's 36 under 36. I want to be on Forbes under 30. I want to be like recognized by the business community. I want to be taken seriously, not just like a nice Jewish single girl. And I remember like, I was like, okay, that's my next step. And I also find, like, side note, and we'll get back to the Forbes under 30 comment, but I believe in going to events where you stand out. So I will go to I'll go to like Wall Street networking events. I'll go to all these corporate events where there's like tons of like rich old white guys, right? But the idea is I'm trying to network where my organization stands out, because otherwise it's the same conversation again and again. It's just networking. And I actually find we get a lot more opportunities than if I were to go to a social innovation summit. So I very closely align myself with the startup world, especially the Forbes community. I've gone to a lot of their events, and it's great to find other founders. And the truth is, it's a lot more difficult to, I'm able to connect with them really well, but we're doing very different things, right? They're talking to venture capitalists, and I'm trying to like network to find a philanthropist. In some ways, it's the same language. In other ways, it's completely different. So that's something that I was always struggling with, but I would, and now to go back to the Forbes under 30, I would go to all these events, and like, I've been nominated to almost get on the Forbes under 30 list. And then it's like, you see people who either, who've gotten it, people who are more in idea phase than, having done it. And the truth is, a lot of it comes down to like networking with the right people and who and all of a sudden I'm like asking myself, should I be spending my time hanging out with different people? Like, it kind of like got me in like a swirl of like, maybe I should just be hanging out with these people and networking with these people, because when I get closer, then, because it's all about who and those lists happen to be like very, very incestuous in that way. And you kind of get yourself in that swirl. And the truth is, like, if I'm looking for external validation, I'm not gonna get where I want to be. And so I joke about those lists, but you kind of have to leverage it. I saw somebody else had that initial, like, not 30 under 30, and it's because he was like 36 or 37. But the idea there was, embrace it, stop looking for it, and just keep your head down and keep working at it, because, you don't want to change who you are, right? I could spend all my day focusing on trying to get into media channels and media networks to promote our work, which would be great and would help impact our organization in the long run. But it would take away from the impactful work that I'm doing right now on the ground. And so to push myself away from that, I kind of need to lean into that and embrace it.
Totally. I quipped, someone asked me a few weeks ago if I had any interest in politics. I worked in like a chief of staff role internally at Goldman, and I do a lot of fundraising for nonprofits, which obviously translates well to politics. And my response was, I've got way too much to do to go into politics.
Right.
Because I view it in a similar way, where you spend so much time trying to get people to like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're not getting the work done. So it's like an interesting corollary to, you can behave that way in any sphere. So I love that attitude of just centering the work, and then good things will come. Like, it might take longer, there won't be any shortcuts, but
it's also, and I forgot to mention this, I always joke, people love to watch me fail. Like, for a very long time, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but people like to see relatedness. Every grant for like a couple, again, this is something I should be doing more, but like, when all those emails weren't being answered, I actually took a screenshot of I crossed out the name of who was going to, but like, I took a screenshot of that full list of people, of the full list of subject lines in that email, showing, hey, these emails didn't get answered, but I kept going. I posted so many of my rejection letters that I spent hours and hours on grants or meetings trying to get. And those are the ones that get 200, 300, 400 likes. People love it. And I don't think people love it because they want to see me fail, but they want to relate. And there are so few people who are on the Forbes under 30 list. There are so many more people who are not on the Forbes under 30 list. So let's connect with the people who are not on the Forbes under 30 list, and the people who are going to feel like they can connect with you. Because when they see that, they're like, oh yeah, this girl's an entrepreneur. Yeah, and she still hasn't gone on that list either. Me, same, right? That's why you reached out. That other people have also reached out because of that. People want people that they can connect with.
Yeah, they want authenticity. I mean, hierarchies like that are so arbitrary, and it just doesn't really serve anyone well. If that arbitrary thing is going to become your identity, it's not serving you well as that person. And if it makes someone else feel less than, it's not serving them well. So it's just kind of unnecessary. And what I hear you saying over and over again is just like, it seems like you've been on this journey to just better understand yourself. And that's sort of like how, even thinking back, like, why did I want to give that sock in the first place? Why did I want to go ask others for it? Why did I want to get 1,000,000 of them? If you had to sum up, and not humanizing homelessness as your mission, I know that's what you pour your work into, but like, what would you sum up your own personal mission in life?
I would say that I'm very naturally a connector, right?
Hmm.
And whether it's connecting strangers, connecting people in the corporate space and people who live in shelters, I love connecting people. I think the power of connection is so important. I think talking to strangers actually, and there have been New York Times articles that it creates a lot of endorphins. I think people gravitate to people who are very similar to them time and time again. But I think talking to people who are more different than you is what adds color and perspective to your life. And if there's one thing I could do in life, it would be I want to connect people. And I think that's what runs the core of my mission. Now, this is just taking two groups who would really not likely run into each other and bring them together at the dinner table.
Yeah, no, I see a lot of similarities, honestly, between us as people. I mean, I also feel like I love being a connector, and I similarly was like, nonprofit world and technology. They don't understand each other. They don't
Yeah.
meet eye to eye. There's a lot of friction. It is the kind of the pinnacle of like a capitalist sales ad driven system meets people trying to do impact work. It's like,
And by the
they
way,
need.
a lot of funding in the startup space, all of a sudden I would be at these, conferences at these like startup communities. And quite frankly, the nonprofits that are gaining recognitions are the ones that are in the tech space, right? But
Yeah,
my clients can't use technology, right? Like the group
right.
I'm
It's
working with doesn't have access to technology. What do you do?
it's all about translating to something that's actually accessible and meaningful, right? Like, I started this, we've gone through a lot of iterations. We started with a platform that was like a shopping experience. So you, Adina, you could log in and say, oh, great, there's 40 different categories of fundraising tools, and I can go in and research them and compare them and see their pricing. And it's like, oh, that's kind of nice. But you're like, okay, wait, I've got hundreds of people that need socks. So like, I need to get back to that. Like, it's just, it was still too much work. And the engagement was really low. And talk about seeing someone fail. We failed. We did not get any traction. I wasted a ton of my money, all of my time, put my career on the line for that. And what we realized was it was just really simple stuff, was like, they don't have time for this. And not only do they not have time, they don't have the resources to spend on it, to start investing their time and the expertise. I mean, I'm talking about like organizations holistically, not any one person.
Right.
And because of that, and what they're staring at, this ocean, this flood of options, you search for something on Google and you get 60 million results. How helpful is that? Right. And
Right.
by the way, the first 20 are ads or like SEO driven results that are just
Yeah.
companies. So it's like, how do you navigate? It's just like this sort of people kind of retreating more and more and more, and the trust is just gone. And so we realized, we were like, it's pretty simple. Can we just create a space for someone to ask for help? Like, in their own words, take no time, no pressure. They don't need to feel self-conscious about it. Just say, like, hey, we collect clothes for homeless people, and I have trouble keeping track of my major donors, or I have trouble finding corporate
How
sponsorship.
about I have a Salesforce account and someone's tried teaching me like 2-3 times, sitting me down for like an hour to use it, and I still can't figure out how to use it, right? Like, I don't even remember what my Salesforce login is, right? And these are like things that are really real and come up time and time again.
Yeah. And I think we're not saying we've solved it, but I feel like we're in the right direction of just not forcing something onto a nonprofit person, trying to understand and meet them where they are. We just hosted our first like support group. So I started it's group therapy for nonprofit leaders.
Need
And
that so bad.
Tuesday nights at 5:30 Eastern. And for our first group. So we had 8 people sign up, and we're going through this conversation. And I started it out and I was like, okay, I sat down to write out rules, like ground rules for this work and structure. And I was reading over it and I literally deleted everything because I was just like, these people don't need more rules. They don't need another person telling them what to do. Answer these 10 questions on your grant application that you're probably not going to get, write that 10th email, all that stuff. And I was like, I'm just going to come into this space and say, I don't have rules for you. I have commitments from myself.
Right.
And I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be reliable. And that's my promise to you. And it was just so eye-opening to see. First of all, everyone was just kind of like, oh my God. Like I could tell there's a
Yeah,
little
by the
like,
way, I just signed up for this like consulting, like basically like this consulting situation. Basically, someone's going to be like strategic consultant, coach, mix of things. And he sent me an email with like 10 questions that were all like paragraphs to fill out. And I literally said to him, I'm doing so much work. I don't have time for this. Like, let's get on the phone and talk about it and have that be part of it. Cause this is like, wasting my time. You're going to be reading on your own. I'm going to, you're going to be taking what I write down. I'm not a writer. You're going to be taking at face value.
well,
And
back to your discovery with Diego, right? That person needed to ask you what you needed, not send you a list of like questions to respond to.
Exactly.
And for me, the biggest takeaway out of that whole thing was we got into this discussion with people, all different types of organizations, not all EDs, some more junior than others, all over across the country. And someone was just said, like, I walk to work every day to a community center in Kensington in Philadelphia, and I see someone shoot up with heroin literally every day on my walk to work. And they're like, that weighs on me so much that it's almost hard to like focus on my job because I'm just the overarching societal issue around the opioid crisis. I feel it on my back. And I just heard her talking about this, and everyone else in the group. It's one of those things that makes you sit up pretty straight in your chair to be like, okay, my problems are like not that bad. But I was just like, to think of her then getting to work and she gets a cold call from a software salesperson telling him how they're going to fix her problems. I'm like, this is the issue, right? It's impossible for that person to see her as a person that's struggling. And the more we can see people for who they are, get them comfortable sharing their problems, we're going to get to real productive, cooperative technology applications to solve those problems.
So I know you were talking about you navigating spaces where you just would throw yourself out there and be like the one in the room that doesn't really fit in a Forbes event or a Wall Street event or whatever. So as you've kind of navigated those two worlds, which too often live in separate places, what is something you've learned from the for-profit world that you try to incorporate into your organization? And what is something that you value about your nonprofit that you wish more businesses would incorporate?
Okay. Whew, that's like can I say something before I answer those two questions?
Of course.
I remember when I was in social work school, I was at NYU, and the Stern School of Business at NYU had a social entrepreneurship program. And to me, I was like, there's something missing here, because the business school is great. And it's great that they have a social entrepreneurship program, but the people in business school are not working with the communities that need the social innovation.
Mm-hmm.
It's the students in the social work school who are working with these, marginalized populations and these minorities every single day who need to incorporate social innovation. And I always saw kind of like a gap there. So in order to come back and answer that question, I wish I saw more businesses. And I'm going to focus on businesses that are focusing on impact. I would like to see more businesses that focus on impact working more with the communities that they're serving. For example, Tom's, and I'm gonna go into that example, and I'm also gonna talk about how the founder of Tom's, really flipped the mistake he made. But he initially was like, let's go to Africa, let's give tons of shoes out. And what he ended up doing was shutting down tons of small businesses in Africa for these people who had these companies, right? That were making shoes, these local businesses that all got put out. Now, eventually he went back and he started creating, factories that would employ people from Africa to make these shoes. But that's just a small example of something that happens far too often in the homelessness, not in the homelessness space, sorry, in the business innovation space, in the business impact space. It's like, here's this great model, here's this great idea, and here's this thing that I think we need. But unfortunately, we're missing actually listening to the community and finding out what's helpful and what's not. I see it time and time again, the amount of people who have reached out to me who are sustainable when it comes to the environment. I don't know if you're familiar with Diva cups or menstrual cups.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's not familiar, it's essentially, a silicone cup that you can, stick up instead of a tampon that you can use over and over again. That's better and more sustainable for the environment during your period than using a tampon. The problem with that is I have seen it handed out in shelters. I have heard from people who have wanted to start organizations, start companies that are making this and then give out the extras to shelters for this impact, right? You're saving the environment, you're helping, women who are menstruating. But the problem is you need to clean them really well. And you need to have access to be able to clean them really well, or else women are just getting really bad infections from them. So that's something that still happens today all the time. These people who want to help and give back, and actually, so I would say to the business world, to the impact world, to actually listen to the communities that you're working with and get a little more on the ground and not be so blindsided. I think very often we're like, we want to do what we want to do, and we want to make sure it's going well. And it's like, okay, so there are like maybe 7 or 8 people who said that's not a good idea, but there's like 1 or 2 who said it's good. And that's great in the business world when you want to be like a shark and get things done. But when it comes to actually helping people and helping communities, you can't have that attitude. If 8 or 9 of the 11 people you're speaking to are saying this isn't such a good idea, you can't stay in that shark vision, as opposed to maybe 8 or 9 people don't believe in your idea, which happens all the time, right? And actually working with the people. And I'll give the opposite example. When I was first starting these Meet Your Neighbor dinners, there was a group on my college campus, that works on poverty day in and day out. And this was my first time doing Meet Your Neighbor dinner. It was the first time I thought of the idea. I was really excited about it. I asked them to get involved. They said, this is exploitation for people who are homeless. We want nothing to do with it. Wouldn't even have an in-person conversation with me, only communicating. Like I was like begging. I was just like college student who was begging to speak to professionals who work in poverty, and no one would answer me. No one was getting back to me. And it was really frustrating. And then I got an email saying back that was exploitation. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot do this. And I went back and I spoke to Terrence Coffey, my fellow classmate who's previously homeless, who's like, I work in a homeless shelter. This is genius. This is what we need. And I did it. And that same group nominated me as the Social Entrepreneur of the Year years later. So, who are we talking to? Who are we getting our validation from? This is a good idea, or this isn't a good idea. And I think when it comes to businesses making impact, they need to talk to the community that's most affected and get validation from them that it's a good idea. So that's one thing that I would advise the for-profit world to take on.
And I would just quickly to interject to sum up there, what I notice is your point that's a really good one is you can get misdirected in both directions, right? By going to the wrong audience. It's not just that there's confirmation bias or they don't understand, so they don't support you. Like it could go both ways, which are both wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And who are you working with, right? Who are you, like, it's got to be the source of who you want to help that you're talking to first and foremost. They need to be your informants. That's what I really believe. And I don't know if you saw, but I put another LinkedIn post where I said, I'm not the founder of Not Gonna Give a Suck, Diego is, right? Diego, the guy who told me the first thing, we need socks. And the idea that our customers, our clients, the ones that we're serving are the ones who inform our organizations. They're the ones who start our organizations, and they're the ones who should constantly be leading our organizations. So I believe strongly in that. By the same token, if I can give advice to nonprofit organizations, make your cause sexy. It sounds right. There's this marketing aspect, and I have always felt conflicted. On the one hand, this is about promoting homelessness, like bringing it into the spotlight. But honestly, homelessness isn't so cool. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously it's not cool at all, but I'm saying in terms of causes, right? We
Right.
learn about, and different things, things have trends. Sometimes like immigrants and refugees are constantly in the papers. Sometimes Black Lives Matter are constantly in the papers. So homelessness is something that hasn't really had a lot of spotlight. It's always something that like a few articles here and there trickle, but it's such a constant problem, and something that doesn't get a lot of attention. So for me, one thing that I always say, when I started this organization was I want to make homelessness sexy. Now, what does that mean? I don't want to make it sexy in that way. But what can I do to leverage it? And I think a lot of times I lean in to being a female leader, right? Being an entrepreneur, being a business owner as a woman, right? Being college started, all these different things, and it's a tough balance because I'm like, this organization is not about Adina, right? But Adina is a much better story. The story of a college female who started her own nonprofit straight out of college is a much better story than just talking about issues around homelessness and stigma around homelessness, right? People like hearing my story, and kind of when it comes to different nonprofit organizations, I think today we're seeing more and more transparency. I think if nonprofits could get more into the storytelling game, have their directors telling their founding stories of why they started, what inspired them, and have that be the driver, I think is something that a lot of companies do today that I think would be very beneficial for nonprofits.
Yeah. When I started Empower Us, there's a story about me being this investment banker, worked at Goldman, and I worked directly for the CEO and then left to go like help nonprofits. It kind of has this like nice storyline, but it can cut both ways. I've found it's a really hard balance to walk, where if you lead with that, it's going to be interesting to some people. But others, especially in the nonprofit space, would be like, well, what do you know about my life? You have no idea how to help me. You just think about, and I don't, not that many, like I have heard people actually say that and kind of be kind of mean about it, but most people probably just ignored me. And it reminds me of your story about, going to the powers that be and tackling homelessness on your college campus and trying to talk about what you wanted to do and getting shut down. So I guess, how did you navigate your own storyline and leaning into yourself as a bit of a novice to find success in that?
Well, so it's interesting because I think for you, right, like the ones that you're trying to help are your true clients, right?
Yeah.
And they're the ones who are telling you, no, this isn't going to help, which is, I think, a little bit more complicated. But I think that and for me at least, I think nonprofit leaders get emails every single day of like, here's our new platform for how you can be more innovative and drive a stronger donor base. Here's how you can, here's how you can keep the CRM and use this to, right? Like we're constantly, I can tell you, being badgered by that. I get emails all the time being like, here's literally my third time emailing you. And it's like, I don't have money to pay for you. So first thing you should do is tell me whatever you're offering me, I don't have to pay a penny for, right? Unless it's like, and I don't know if that's your model, but that's something that like, unless you're telling me that you're going to offer me something that's free as a struggling nonprofit, I don't have an interest. That's my first thing, right? Like that's how my defenses go up. And yeah, you need to pay for things to help make an impact. But the truth is, what we really want is, unless you're going to connect us with some donors and some philanthropists and some corporate companies that are going to help us out, then I don't need your CRM that's going to help me keep my donor base better. I need more donors. And I don't know if that's too harsh, but that's how I
No.
have felt when a lot of, people have approached me, and it's like
Yeah.
learning something new that's going to take so much time, um, is going to take away from the time where I could be networking and meeting and connecting with more donors to make a bigger impact.
Yeah.
And I will say that I have had a board, and on my board, I have had some people who have really pushed me, in really powerful ways to come up with P&Ls. I had no idea what a P&L was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? And like come up with these like profit and losses and budgeting and like all these different things that, quite frankly, when they first approached me, I didn't know that I needed it. And once
Hmm.
I had it, once it was set up and organized and they worked with me for hours, it was great. So I think what I would say you're combating a lot is with nonprofit leaders who are kind of, and there's a social work term, it was it, I don't know what I don't know,
Hmm.
right? And I think, no one wants to, many people don't want to learn something new, especially if they don't know why it's even beneficial for their organizations.
Hmm.
For us as nonprofit leaders, we're constantly looking for new networks, new connections, new donors, new corporations, to help us make a bigger impact.
Hmm.
So, unless there's a company that's offering that, it's really difficult to get these nonprofits to sign on. And also, I don't know, you'd be more of an expert on this, but I've actually found it really difficult to find young millennial nonprofit founders. I have found that many of them are, people who have latched onto a bigger organization that have kind of, been swept under that. Or like trust fund babies who, never, it was very easy for them. I have found a few. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but I would say there's much less of a community for it. It's really
Yeah.
hard. Or people have maybe gotten into these like tech nonprofits, I would say, are probably like the few people in the nonprofit space that I've actually met, which is like kind of a different category, I would say. So it's been difficult. And I would say that the people that you might be approaching are a lot of people who work in the nonprofit space who also might be a little bit older, right?
Hmm.
So more tech platforms are just like more of a headache to deal with, but actually the only way to move forward.
Couple things. The support group that I put together is 8 folks our age that are all like leading nonprofits. So it's I think that's something that drew them all together. Like you said, it's hard to necessarily find that within any local community oftentimes.
Yeah, but you got to tell me how to get into this because I want to be there.
I'll send you the link after this. And then just funny what you mentioned about the emails and stuff you get. We were actually just working on a promo for our new launch and want to get nonprofit members of our site to read their worst spam email subject lines that they've gotten, sort of like a Jimmy Kimmel mean tweets.
Oh my God, I
So
have them.
like act now, this deal ends at midnight, just like awful stuff. It's like, it's again, I go back to that woman at the community center in Kensington who is like seeing someone shoot up with heroin outside of the community center and then gets into like that email about, and it's just like you're totally missing the mark. And then just to your last point about cost is like I actually think I'll push back a little bit on you because I actually think the free thing is a big problem in this space. So you talked about with your Salesforce subscription. What I'd rather see and what we facilitate in the marketplace is you say, yeah, I could probably use a better CRM. Like I want to spend 20 seconds writing this down and then not think about it again. And then people that want to tell you about that, or instead of the spam emails that you're never going to respond to, can like request your time through our platform, and you can look at it on your time and decide if you want to engage or not. But if you talk to them, you get paid for your time.
Right. So that's awesome. And that's what I saw you LinkedIn message me. And that I was like, that's genius.
Because
Because
then it's like, it doesn't need to be a giveaway for that company, right? You don't have to disrupt their like normal economic model. You're just taking the money they would have spent on ads and marketing and put it into your hands. And then now if you had a couple of those calls, you could cover the cost of whatever tool they were trying to sell you in the first place, if they do a good job pitching you on
right.
it.
And I could still say no and still get that funding, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's up to
No,
you.
it's a really smart model.
So anyway, thank you for sharing some of that, because that's just helpful for me too. So selfishly, I'm glad you
No,
gave your
it's
your
really
input.
great. It's really great. And by the way, I really that's what I thought you were saying when we were, messaging on LinkedIn. And I really think that that's a much better model, quite frankly, because, why are you going to talk to me for 20 minutes about something that I probably won't use and it's wasting my time? But, oh, you're going to give me a meeting for 20 minutes where I'll make some bucks for my organization and learn about it. But right, like we're all willing to spend money on things that we understand that will help us, but no one wants a sales pitch, right? So if we're being paid for our time, we'll take a sales pitch.
Yeah, and you put the information out there, so it, at least to our whole point of listening to people, there's a starting point of like, they're not just lobbing in a cold call or a spam email. It's like they read your listing. If they're doing a good job, they're going to customize it to try to solve whatever problem you've raised. So, I mean, not to say that everyone's perfect or does that 100%, but that's definitely where you see more success, which has been really cool to see. And the other thing, and I love that you talk about yourself and your organization as a business, and you're a business leader, because you are. And I feel like there's this impact, and you talk about problems with businesses that are trying to achieve impact and where they miss the mark. Getting really simple, what does impact mean to you? Because I don't think it's that different between what a nonprofit and a business is doing. And I feel like there's some misunderstanding out there about what impact is. So what does it mean to you?
Like if you look up like the definition of impact, it would probably be, achieving what you set out to do. So I think impact is achieving your organization's mission. And that's to me what it is. Our mission is to humanize homelessness one sock at a time by turning transactions into interactions, right? So our mission, quite frankly, is turning transactions into interactions and humanizing homelessness. So what is impact? Impact is, what is the mission of your organization? And is everything you're doing in your company leading back to your mission, right? Like people have said to me, during COVID, kids need tutoring in schools, during COVID, kids need, right? All these different things. I'm like, that's great. And I, Adina, am so happy to do that. Given my network, I, Adina, am so happy to share this information on my personal, Facebook, LinkedIn. I've even shared different ways for people to get involved with different organizations or different ways to give back. But what Knock Knock Give a Sock does is we don't volunteer, right? We connect people. And that's why I make sure everything that we're doing is going back to what our mission is. Are we humanizing homelessness? Are we taking a transaction and building it into an interaction? Are we building relationships? So that's, everything I do, my impact. And things can change, yeah, we do socks and yeah, we do meet your neighbor dinners, but you know what? We also start to do music festivals where we bring artists living in homes and artists living in shelters to perform on stage side by side, and called it our Woodstock Music Festival. Right. So it's constantly, impact is achieving your company's mission. So whether you're a for-profit, you're a nonprofit, that's to me what impact is, right? If you want to talk about, changing lives, making the world a better place, I'm happy, but impact isn't always positive, right? So I think it's, we use it as in this positive way, right? When we talk about impact investing and we talk about, making an impact on the world, but the word impact doesn't always mean something positive. So I think for the way that it can translate in both, the for-profit, nonprofit world, it's achieving your mission. So hopefully we have more businesses creating missions that are more ethical and make a more positive impact in the world, right? Because I think there's negative impacts as well, which we see time and time again.
People, especially these days, try to set up the mission of their business to be that a mission, that is like human, and whether or not they adhere to that, I think it's a great point. Like we should all be striving to have that impact, and whether you achieve that through a profit model or a nonprofit model, it's kind of the same standard. And I just think that's,
and you have to look at your product, right? When I was first starting, out, knock, knock, give a sock. It was like 4 years ago when I was starting it full time. And that's when like impact investing started getting really sexy and everyone wanted to give to social enterprise. And there was even conversation like the investing world between philanthropists, like, should we really be giving to money nonprofits or should we just do impact investing, right? Like I started to get nervous in certain meetings being like, why aren't people talking about philanthropy anymore? I mean, you have to look at your product because people really tried to convince me to create a social enterprise model. And for some
Mhm.
people, it's great. If I had a mission that I think could fit in the for-profit world, I would do it. I think it's easier in some ways. It's harder in other ways, but I think it's easier in some ways, especially as impact investing picks up. But you have to look at your product. You have to look at what you're giving. Are you a for-profit? Are you a nonprofit? And there's nothing wrong with either way. Social
Yeah.
enterprises and impact investing are great. Just kind of look at what you are and what you're doing and figure out what fits. I tried fitting, square into a circle and it wasn't working. I tried it for my first, I had this one grant that I was applying for my senior year of college. And it was like the Reynolds Changemaker Challenge. But it was like for social enterprises. And I was like kind of trying to sell us as like a model for, and this was like before we were even doing all of our Meet Your Neighbor events so intensely, but we really tried to sell ourselves like a for-profit where companies, sock companies could give us socks and pay us and we'd be branding them on college campuses as people collected socks. And it's like, sometimes you just got to look at what you're doing and say, oh, I'm a nonprofit or, oh, I'm a for-profit.
Impact investing to me is just kind of a silly term, honestly, because it's like, I don't know how you can justify it coexisting with non-impact investing, because it's like, if you've made a commitment that your investing should have an impact, like, and then you turn that question around and say, okay, how much non-impact investing are you comfortable making as a business? And all of a sudden, like, how do you put a number on that?
Right.
Like,
So I got really nervous because I went to like a UJA Wall Street event and actually like David Solomon, like the CEO of Goldman Sachs, was speaking and they kept talking about impact investing. And I like raised my hand. I probably sound like an idiot, but I was like, so I understand impact investing and how great it is and how much bigger of a commitment Goldman Sachs is making to it. But does that affect how much philanthropy you guys will give? And they very, very quickly said, like, no, it won't affect that. But for us nonprofits, we get nervous. We're like, it's good you guys are doing good in the impact investing world, but don't forget about us nonprofits, and there's so much buzzwords around impact investing that, you kind of do get nervous and jittery. Like, I hope they didn't forget about us.
yeah, no, I hope they sort of converge someday where it's like we can appreciate impact outcomes as a reason you invest, whether you're investing in a nonprofit or for-profit, but maybe getting a little ahead of myself.
Exactly. Except if you give to us, you don't get any cut back, right?
Well, you're investing in future impact, kind of like when you invest in a business, you invest in, future earnings, but they're just
future
not
earnings. Exactly. And that's where the big, that's where impact investing is a funny word, kind of how you were saying.
Yeah, it's very funny. But anyway, okay, last question I have for you. In pursuit of your mission, personally and as an organization, 5 years from today, what is your biggest goal for yourself as a person and for the organization?
So great question. And it's interesting that you asked me because I think pre-COVID, I would have had a different answer. I was kind of on this trajectory in the next 10 years, we'll be in the 10 most populated cities across America, having a program director in all of these cities and kind of having like our 3 buckets of our work, happening in local cities all over America. So I would have said in 5 years to be in 5 different cities. Now that COVID has hit, we really have been set back 2 years, but we've also advanced with this new, book initiative and this new pivot as a way to work more closely with families and bring families living in homes and families living in shelters together. So I would say, I hope in the next 5 years, our Meet Your Neighbor, our Knock Knock Give a Sock books are being sold across America and are also in shelters across America so that children living in homes can see themselves as being able to make an impact for their neighbors on the street, and kids living in shelters can see themselves as superheroes making an impact in their neighborhood. So that's what I hope in 5 years professionally. I hope we will start to really make a dent and an impact on families living in shelters and creating more of an understanding and bridging the gap between families living in homes and families living in shelters. Personally, I hope that I'm proud of the work that I've done. I think I am proud of the work that I've done, but I'm also always like, come on, this is all you've done in 4 years. There's kind of like that little voice in my head. And who knows, maybe in 5 years, I'll hope that voice is still there because it pushes me along. But I hope that there's also a piece of me that will be able to look at the work that I've done and feel more proud and accomplished with it. And I don't know if that's like founder syndrome, entrepreneurship syndrome, where we feel like it's never enough, like we haven't done enough, we're not moving fast enough. But kind of working on being proud of the work that I've done without, and giving myself that breathing break instead of having days where I feel great and having days where I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you, Adina?
Well, I feel like if you're taking on something like homelessness, that's such a big, complex, misunderstood problem. And so it's tempting when you see how big of a problem it is and you just want to fix it. And it's like you're taking on the ocean, you know, and I sort of feel like you've got to find a way to make it your pond, right? Where
Right.
it's like you can make it across, you can manage it. And that's just the only way to, you still make the same steps, the same strokes, the same laps, but you have more sense of ownership and accomplishment. And it's really just about perspective. So I hear you on that. I hope you do. I hope you feel proud, because I know we've only known each other for like an hour, but I am already like beaming with pride about everything you're doing. And I'm just really excited to see where it goes.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to stay connected. I'm excited to hopefully be a part of this group of 8 nonprofit founders that you put together.
Yeah.
I would so love to be a part of it. I think it sounds awesome. I read a little bit, but hearing about it in person definitely makes a bigger impact and makes it stick out in my mind. So definitely send me that information. Also, I just love, thank you so much for creating a platform for me to share the work that we're doing, sharing it with the world. You know, the only way we can make it impact, a positive impact. I need to start saying that. The only way we can make a positive impact is by lifting each other up and sharing each other's work. So I'm excited to share your work, and thank you so much for sharing mine.
Thanks for coming by. Be sure to visit joinpond.com and jump in when you're ready.